Today's Gospel is from John chapter 11, verses 32 through 44. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, See how he loved him? But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, Take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead for 4 days. Jesus said to her, Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so they may believe that you sent me. When he heard this, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, Unbind him and let him go. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Every year we read the names. Every year we read the names. And we light special candles for those people we have named that were part of the fabric of the congregation that have left us in the past year. And this year, the 5 names that are read are all people who have contributed so much to the life of this congregation. And I'm not going to do it today, but last night we had a smaller crowd, so I asked people to tell me stories about these people. And it was a delightful time as people got up and shared stories about they remembered these people. And this is what All Saints gives us the occasion to do, is to sit down and remember the ways we have been loved and cared for and shaped by the people who have gone on before us. Then after we've done that part with the folks we have lost, we then invite you. And today during the communion liturgy, I'm going to invite you all to come up, and you can take as many candles as you want. We have a bunch of them sitting here right by the first pew. I'm going to sit there and help you if you need some help. Light a candle, put it in the sand. And there's this great phrase that Paul uses, this cloud of witnesses. And we can see how all of these individual candle lights that represent somebody has had a hand in shaping us, shaping our faith, making it possible for us to become the people we have become. And we in the church since the 5th century have been doing this because it's important to do this. It is very important to remember and to celebrate the fingerprints of these people on our lives, because it is through their work and their love and their patience that we discover God's love and patience, and the places where God has placed God's fingerprints on each of our lives. For whatever reason, this year I've been thinking about 2 women that were very important to me. And so I will light a candle for each of them means two. One is my mother, and the other is my grandmother McGlade. And the thing about my mother and my grandmother McGlade is that in many ways they struggled throughout life with a host of personal issues. I think my mother was a little agoraphobic. She did not like leaving her house, and she felt very comfortable with a book in her lap. When Dad retired on Tuesdays, they would make a trip to the Worthington Library, and she'd come home with a bag full of books, and she'd have them all read by the next Tuesday. My mother was a voracious reader, and she was a fast reader. I could not believe how fast she could consume a book. When I was in college, the Thornbirds was a big rage, and it was a real thick, heavy novel, and she consumed it in 2 nights. And I would used to say to her, Mom, how do you do that? And she says, well, the problem is when you read one word after another, after another, after another. When I read, I just look at a whole paragraph. And I've read about people like this. There are some people that just have this ability to look at a paragraph, get it, and move on. And then she says as she got better at it, she ended up doing page by page. And here I was, a college student, I'm saying, well, can you teach me how to do this? Because, college students have got gobs of books to read, and Mom couldn't do it. And I have sort of resigned myself to the fact that I'm a slow reader. I have to read one word after another, after another, after another. But Mom, wow. The thing about my mother, too, that I've always appreciated was because she was such a voracious reader, because she was never really comfortable outside of her house, she knew a lot of stuff. Maybe through books, maybe through the news, maybe not through personal experience, but through her imagination. And so when I was a kid growing up, she was always taking things from the newspaper and circling them. Here, read this. And she introduced me to people like Doc Hammarskjöld, who was the UN Secretary General who got killed in a plane crash in 1961 trying to bring peace to the Congo. And she said, this man is an important man. You should read him. And so I spent the better part of my early life reading everything I could about Doc Hammarskjöld. And one of my favorite books is his book of prayers and poems that he wrote before he died, called Markings. And I would never have done that if I wasn't in the 4th grade when he died. And my mom says, this is a good man. My mother was quick to point out Martin Luther King and how important he was to the well-being of our nation. And when I was in high school, we would read the Citizen Journal together. The Columbus Citizen Journal was a great little newspaper. The Dispatch ended up buying it and then shutting it down. But the years it ran, and she would take people out there and on the editorial page and circle things, says, read this, and then we would talk about it. For a woman who was afraid to get out into the world, she sure knew an awful lot about it. She was never raised in the church. Her parents weren't church people. She was born in 1923. Her mother was elected to the school board, and during Prohibition, her father made homebrew and ice cream. And on weekends, people in the little village of White Cottage, Ohio, would come to their house, and he would serve them homemade ice cream and homebrew. My daughter thinks it's funny that my grandpa was a bootlegger. When she married Dad introduced her to the former Methodist Church, and my mother took to it. And so when she wasn't reading stuff about the world or great long novels, she she was reading devotional material. And so she obviously has been very important in shaping my life. Then there was my grandmother McGlade, my father's mother. Grandmother McGlade was a source of frustration for everybody who knew her. The unkind joke in our family is this. Grandpa retired, and a month later he died of a heart attack. And the joke is he was trying to weigh out what was better, death or the rest of his retirement with Nellie. I say that was an unkind joke, and it was an unkind joke. My father was the only one of 4 children that survived past the age of 3. When my grandmother was 14 years old, she stumbled into the barn on the family farm, and there, hanging in the rafters, was her aunt who decided to kill herself on that particular day. My grandmother was not raised in a time when people who had emotional and mental health issues would find help. And so I think she was probably bipolar as I look back on her life. She was very dark about everything. She knew that something bad was going to happen that day. She knew it in her bones, whether something bad would happen or not. And I remember as a child, after Grandpa died, every Christmas we'd go to her house, and she'd pull each of us, my sister and I, my sister who's 3 years younger than me, up on her lap, and she'd whip out two brand new John F. Kennedy $50, and she'd sit there and she'd hold them in front of our eyes, and she'd say, "I'm going to give you this for Christmas." And then she'd say, "This will be the last Christmas you'll have, Grandma, because next year I'll be in heaven with Grandpa." And my dad's response was always the same every year. "Oh, Mom, for crying out loud, stop that." And this went on well into my high school years. And finally, even Grandmother had enough sense to know that she couldn't pull that off anymore. I think the worst day of my grandmother's life was when my dad decided to go off to college instead of take a job at the lawnmower factory down the road. She was really mad at him for that. Being the only one of 4 children, I think she just clung so much to Dad. The second worst day of her life was probably when Dad married my mother. My mother and my grandmother did not get along very well. The third and fourth worst days was probably when I was born and then when my sister was born. We were competition for the affections of her Eddie. Growing up in the presence of my grandmother was not always easy. It wasn't until I got into seminary and started looking at the psychodynamics of people with problems and issues that I began to understand that if she was born and raised at a different time, she might have done much better and been much happier in life. As I look at my mother, and I think often if she was born and raised in a different time, she may have gone off to college, and she probably would have been teaching somewhere as a professor. But the family she was raised in, college was not even on the radar scope. These 2 women have been very important to me for different reasons. Often when I have read the lists of people who have passed away, and say, you never knew that person. That person was a real hellcat. That person was a handful. That person was a pain in the you-know-what. And the only reason she's on that list is she was a member here, or he was a member here. How does that make them a saint? How does that make them a saint? I don't always quite know how to respond to that. We tend to think of saints as being people who are really holy and do everything right. But human beings are more complex than that. And saints lose their way like everyone else. The only answer I've ever been able to find is God is God, Christ is Christ, love is love, grace is grace. And we never ought to belittle the idea that after we die, Christ is still working on our behalf. In the gospel lesson, Lazarus has died. We get a flavor of the chapter when Martha tells Jesus, if only you would have been here. And we hear the crowd saying, oh, if only he would have been here. He could have done something. He could have saved Lazarus. But he wasn't. He screwed up. Didn't get here in time. You could hear the disappointment in Martha's voice. You could hear and feel the disappointment in the crowd. It's all done. Lazarus is gone. What more can be done? And Jesus does something rather amazing. He orders that the tomb be opened. And of course, Martha says, you don't want to do that. He's been gone 4 days. You can imagine what it's going to smell like. And Jesus insists. And once the tombstone has been rolled away, Jesus simply commands Lazarus to come out. And he does. Could it be that Jesus heals after death? Could it be that Jesus has the grace and the love and the power to transform us even when our soul has left this physical body and make us new again? The only thing left for Jesus to do is command that Lazarus be unbound and let go, to be free. So as we think about the saints in our lives, the good ones and the bad ones, the ones who have loved us greatly and the ones who have frustrated us mightily, doesn't make any difference. God is God, Christ is Christ, love is love, and grace is grace. And whether I like it or not, my grandmother's fingerprints are on me, like so many others. A part of who I am and what I am has been shaped not only by my mother, but my grandmother and my father and my Aunt Stella and so many theology professors I had in seminary died this year. You get them every week and you don't even know who they are. Know that you are loved in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.